Oh, I am Xiao Yang. You should have clarified, Yuan said after being pressed by Elder Bai. I also didn't know you were that disciple's grandfather. You have my condolences. Your condolences. How dare you? Elder Bai's furious roar thundered through the mountains, shaking the ground beneath them. The sheer force of his voice sent ripples through the air, as if the world itself trembled beneath the weight of his rage. You were the one who killed him. He bellowed, his aura surging like a raging storm. Take your condolences back immediately before I lose control of my hands. His killing intent exploded outward, suffocating and oppressive, causing the weaker disciples in the crowd to instinctively step back. His eyes, filled with unrelenting hatred, locked onto Yuan. However, Yuan calmly shook his head and responded, "There's been a misunderstanding. Although I am offering my condolences, it's not for Bai Zan's death." What? Elder Bai was so taken aback by Yuan's response that it momentarily dumbfounded him. What kind of response is that? Even the disciples behind him all wore bewildered looks on their faces. I am offering my condolences to something else, Elder Bai, Yuan continued, his voice calm and clear, each word striking like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. The crowd stiffened, stunned by his audacity. But before they could fully process his words, he delivered another blow. Despite being an honorable and genuine person, you were unfortunate enough to have such a despicable grandson. Most of you aren't aware of it because of how well he hid it, but Bai Zan is a sick individual who has harmed a lot of people behind the curtains. Gasps rippled through the gathered disciples. Shock, outrage, and disbelief painted their faces as they stared at Yuan, unable to believe what they had just heard. Even Elder Bai, whose fury had already reached its peak, faltered for a brief moment, his eyes widening in stunned silence before a new wave of rage surged forth. Why, you son of a bitch? Elder Bai's voice trembled with rage, his body shaking uncontrollably. Is killing my grandson not enough for you? Not only did you take his life, but now you dare to slander his name even after death. Do you even have a heart? His aura surged violently, crackling with raw fury. His restraint, already hanging by a thread, snapped as he roared, although I promised the sect leader that I wouldn't kill you with my own hands, I will have to break that promise. A suffocating killing intent exploded from Elder Bai, pressing down on the surroundings like an unrelenting storm. The gathered disciples remained frozen, unable to fault him for his outburst. To them, Bai Zan had been a paragon of righteousness, a shining beacon of kindness and honor. For Yuan to brand him a sick individual was beyond outrageous, it was outright blasphemy. In response to Elder Bai's fury, Yuan remained unfazed and calmly asked, "Have you cleaned out his immortal cave yet?" What? Elder Bai's movements faltered, his wrath momentarily disrupted by the unexpected question. The crowd, equally confused, murmured among themselves, unsure of where Yuan was going with this. With a confident smile, Yuan continued, Bai Zan's immortal cave. Only core disciples are supposed to have one, but since he was your grandson, he was granted that privilege despite being an outer court disciple. Have you gone through his belongings yet? Elder Bai narrowed his eyes, his breath still heavy with anger. If not, Yuan added, then I can prove to you that my words aren't slander, but the truth. A hush fell over the gathered disciples. The weight of Yuan's confidence sent ripples of doubt through them for the first time. If I am wrong, I'll forfeit my life. Yuan's words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and absolute. Yet, despite Yuan placing his very life on the line, Elder Bai hesitated. His hands trembled, not with rage, but with something far more insidious, uncertainty. Checking Bai Zan's immortal cave would be akin to admitting that doubt had taken root in his heart. It would also mean he had entertained the words of his grandson's killer. And if Yuan was merely toying with him, if this was nothing more than a cruel deception, then Elder Bai would never be able to forgive himself. His fingers clenched into a fist, his nails digging into his palm. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like an iron chain. The gathered disciples held their breath, sensing his inner turmoil. What's the matter, Elder Bai? Yuan's voice was calm yet laced with something almost mocking. Are you thinking about killing me before you even confirm the truth for yourself? In that case, I have misjudged your character and nature. That was my mistake. You can kill me now. With that, Yuan took a bold step forward, his arms spreading wide open as if inviting death itself. His eyes, steady and unwavering, bore into Elder Bai's with an unshakable conviction. Why you? Elder Bai's entire body trembled, his breath ragged. He had lived for decades, experienced countless trials, and met all kinds of people, yet he had never encountered someone like Yuan. A man who faced death without fear. A man who, despite being surrounded by enemies, stood as if he alone controlled the outcome. For the first time, true hesitation gripped Elder Bai's heart. If Yuan were lying, why was he so willing to risk his life? Why did he not beg, cower, or even show the slightest flicker of doubt? Eventually, Elder Bai took a deep breath, steadying himself before speaking. As atonement for being willing to break my promise to the sect leader, I will entertain you this time. His voice, though still laced with anger, carried a weight of restraint. It was not a concession nor an admission of doubt but a momentary allowance, a way to justify the crack in his absolute certainty. However, if it turns out to be slander, I will make you suffer a fate worse than death. I swear my soul on it. Elder Bai swore as he glared at Yuan. Once Elder Bai made his decision, he wasted no time. Without another word, he led Yuan directly to Bai Zan's immortal cave, a place that few had ever stepped foot in. The journey took them to Immortal Peak, a sacred ground within the sect where only core disciples and sect elders were permitted to enter. It was a place of prestige, home to the most promising talents and the most powerful figures in the sect. Immortal caves were sacred cultivation grounds, naturally formed in locations where spiritual energy gathered at an accelerated rate. Nestled within mountains or hidden in secluded areas, these places brimmed with an abundance of spiritual energy, allowing cultivators to cultivate at a speed far beyond ordinary means. Because of their immense value, immortal caves were considered natural treasures, reserved only for the most talented. To have access to one was not just an honor but a testament to one's potential and standing within the sect. In fact, even amongst the few core disciples and sect elders at the sect, only a select few had access to them. The only reason Bai Zan was able to enter the Immortal Peak, much less acquire an immortal cave of his own as an outer court disciple, was because of his grandfather's status as Grand Elder. Additionally, the number of immortal caves a sect possessed was directly tied to its prestige and standing in the cultivation world. These sites were rare and highly sought after, meaning that a sect's ability to control them was a testament to its influence and power. The more immortal caves a sect owned, the more valuable it became, as these sites provided an unmatched advantage in cultivation speed. Powerful sects with multiple immortal caves often attracted the most talented disciples, further solidifying their dominance over weaker sects. Upon reaching Bai Zan's immortal cave, Elder Bai finally halted before the entrance, his gaze fixed on the sealed doors. His hands clenched at his sides as a deep breath escaped him. "This is your final chance," he warned in a cold tone. Despite the seriousness in Elder Bai's tone and demeanor, Yuan couldn't help but smile. "You're still able to offer me warnings. You're just as kind as I remember, Elder Bai." "What?" Elder Bai frowned, not because he thought Yuan was mocking him. "He's speaking as if he's known me for a long time, but this is definitely our first meeting." In the end, Elder Bai decided to ignore Yuan's remark and opened Bai Zan's immortal cave. Although the exterior of the immortal cave bore a resemblance to the confinement chambers, its interior was a world apart. Stepping inside, one was immediately met with a sense of vastness. The space was far larger than one would expect from the outside. Unlike the cold, barren, and almost suffocating atmosphere of the confinement chambers, the immortal cave was a place of luxury and vitality. Elegant furnishings filled the space, from finely crafted wooden tables and silk-draped seating to intricate jade ornaments that shimmered under the soft glow of spiritual lamps. The very air itself felt alive, so rich in spiritual energy that a thin mist naturally formed, drifting lazily across the floor like an ethereal veil. Every breath taken inside carried a surge of renewed energy, making it clear why these caves were reserved for only the most privileged cultivators. The stark contrast between the two locations was undeniable. The confinement chamber was a place meant to break the spirit, to suppress and isolate, while the immortal cave was designed to nurture one's potential, offering an environment that could elevate a cultivator's strength at an unparalleled rate. The moment Elder Bai stepped into the immortal cave, his breath hitched. The unmistakable presence of Bai Zan's essence within the space brought forth a wave of emotions. It was as if, for a fleeting moment, his grandson was still there, still sitting in meditation. A sharp pain stabbed at Elder Bai's chest. The loss he had tried so hard to suppress came crashing back with brutal force. His expression darkened, grief quickly twisting into rage. His eyes snapped toward Yuan, his killing intent erupting once more. The air turned heavy, suffused with his boundless fury. "You," he growled, his voice low and venomous, his entire being trembling with restraint. To Elder Bai, this place was a painful reminder of what had been stolen from him, the grandson who had once cultivated here, who had once carried his pride and expectations. And standing before him, utterly unfazed, was the very person responsible for his loss. The urge to strike Yuan down where he stood clawed at his mind, yet something held him back. Yuan calmly spoke a moment later, "I won't take a step from here just in case you think I will try to do something." He pointed at a certain object resting on a shelf and continued, "All of the evidence is inside that box." Elder Bai's sharp gaze locked onto the wooden box that Yuan was pointing at. At a glance, it seemed ordinary, unassuming, just a simple container resting among Bai Zan's belongings. However, Elder Bai could tell the box was heavily protected by several layered arrays. There was even one that prevented tampering, ensuring the contents would be destroyed if someone tried opening it by force. A sense of unease crept into Elder Bai's heart. Why would Bai Zan need something so heavily secured inside his own immortal cave, where no one but himself had access? The tamper prevention array was especially suspicious. What the hell is inside that box? Not even the sect's secret techniques are that heavily guarded. Elder Bai swallowed nervously as his heart began beating faster and faster. "What's wrong, Elder Bai? Aren't you curious what's inside that box? Go ahead and open it," Yuan urged him. Elder Bai gritted his teeth, his jaw tightening as he fought the overwhelming urge to strike Yuan down where he stood. With a deep breath, he forced himself forward, his steps small, unsteady, and full of uncertainty. As he reached the wooden box, his hand hovered above it for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly. Then, with a slow, measured breath, he steeled himself, grabbing the box a second later. Once the wooden box was in his grasp, Elder Bai swallowed nervously, his fingers tightening around the edges as he stared at it in silence. Despite the many protective arrays guarding the box, to Elder Bai, they were nothing but child's play, a minor inconvenience at best. After a moment of silence, he deactivated all of the arrays and opened the wooden box, revealing another object inside. A spatial ring, he muttered with raised eyebrows. He turned to look at Yuan and asked, "What is this? How is this evidence? With all due respect, why don't you take a look inside that spatial ring first?" Yuan calmly responded, "HMPH. Elder Bai gave a cold snort before looking inside the spatial ring with his divine sense. The moment his consciousness touched the contents inside, his expression froze. This is. His eyes widened in shock, and in the span of a breath, that shock twisted into horror. His face drained of color, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled his divine sense away, as if he had been burned. Seeing Elder Bai's reaction, Yuan narrowed his eyes and spoke, "I can assume that I've proven myself, right? This doesn't prove anything. How do I know that this was truly done by my grandson? For all I know, you could have planted this evidence here." Yuan sneered, "This is my first time entering this place, so how could I have planted the evidence? Then how did you know about this evidence?" Elder Bai roared. If Yuan had never been to Bai Zan's immortal cave, how did he know about the wooden box and Bai Zan's spatial ring? This didn't make any sense to Elder Bai. Yuan shrugged, "You wouldn't believe me even if I told you. Try me." After a moment of silence, Yuan spoke with a smile, "I came from the future." "Why you what?" Elder Bai's eyes widened with disbelief at Yuan's outrageous and delusional claim. "See, I told you that you wouldn't believe me." Yuan sighed as he shook his head. "Anyway, I have already given you the proof that Bai Zan was never a good guy. If you still don't believe me, there's nothing I can do but accept my death." Elder Bai gritted his teeth in silence. Eventually, he said, "I will spare you, at least until I finish my investigation, so don't think for a second that you're free yet." "I understand. You are also prohibited from leaving the sect until then," Elder Bai added. "I wouldn't be able to go anywhere even if I wanted to as an outer court disciple," Yuan shrugged. Elder Bai glared at him before speaking in a commanding tone, "Get out of my sight." Yuan didn't say another word and immediately left Bai Zan's immortal cave. Once Yuan left, Elder Bai fell to his knees and began puking. "Bai Zan, please tell me this isn't true. That you didn't do these horrific acts, he muttered with a desperate look on his face. Sometime later, Elder Bai sealed Bai Zan's immortal cave and returned to his own living quarters. Inside, he retrieved Bai Zan's spatial ring and, with a flick of his wrist, dumped its contents onto the cold floor. Thud! A series of dull impacts echoed through the room. Bodies. Several human bodies lay sprawled across the floor, eerily motionless. At a glance, they appeared healthy, as though they were simply sleeping. However, spatial rings are not capable of containing living beings, so these people were already dead. Elder Bai stood rigid, staring at the lifeless figures before him, his mind a storm of emotions. These weren't just random people. They were all wearing the immortal monastery's outer court uniform, and Elder Bai even recognized some of their faces, but not because they were prominent disciples. They are all female disciples who went missing many years ago. Elder Bai trembled as he muttered this to himself. The fact these missing disciples' corpses were found inside Bai Zan's immortal cave could only mean that he was involved in their disappearance and death. After mentally preparing himself, Elder Bai began examining these corpses' condition. It didn't take long for him to find evidence that linked them to Bai Zan. To his horror, these corpses had been defiled. Not only had they been defiled, but Elder Bai could find Bai Zan's bodily substance still inside their body. Since these corpses had been stored inside a spatial ring, which perfectly preserved everything, this meant Bai Zan's substance was still fresh, as if it had only recently been produced. As for the identity of the substance's producer, Elder Bai didn't even need it to be examined to know it belonged to Bai Zan because it contained Bai Zan's unique spiritual energy. When Elder Bai reached this point, he could no longer continue being in denial and had to admit that Bai Zan was responsible. After all, unless Yuan had somehow acquired Bai Zan's bodily substance and planted it inside these corpses, there was zero chance Yuan could have framed Bai Zan. After examining the corpses, Elder Bai turned his attention to the pile of clothes that came out with the bodies. They were all clothes meant for females, and Elder Bai could only think of one reason why Bai Zan would have them. He was most likely dressing the corpses up and treating them as if they were dolls. After putting the pieces together, Elder Bai stood in utter silence. His gaze remained fixed on the corpses strewn across the cold floor, his mind whirling as the truth settled in, a truth he had never imagined, never wanted to believe. The realization felt like a blade twisting in his chest. His beloved grandson, Bai Zan, had not been the righteous, honorable cultivator he had so fiercely believed in all these years. He had been hiding something monstrous, something that no excuse could justify. The pain of betrayal burned hotter than anything he had ever known. Then, without warning, boom! Elder Bai's rage erupted like a violent storm, his spiritual energy surging uncontrollably. The very air trembled, his overwhelming power causing the walls of his quarters to crack under the sheer force of his fury despite the defensive formations placed on them. Bai Zan, you shameful bastard! You're lucky that you're already dead, or I would have killed you myself. His voice thundered, filled with grief, fury, and unbearable shame. Although Elder Bai was already certain that Bai Zan was behind the disappearance and deaths of these disciples, he needed more evidence and information before exposing his grandson's crimes to the world. Accusing his own blood was not a decision to be taken lightly, but Elder Bai was a man of unwavering principles. He would not protect evil, even if it came from his own family. This was why Yuan remained calm despite his situation. He knew Elder Bai's sense of justice would not allow personal ties to cloud his judgment. After carefully placing the corpses back into Bai Zan's spatial ring, Elder Bai began investigating everyone who had once been close to him. The deeper their ties to Bai Zan, the greater the pressure he placed on them. Thus, over the next several days, Elder Bai would summon disciple after disciple for questioning. Meanwhile, Yuan returned to his living quarters. Why Yuan? Shi Meili and the others immediately rushed to his side after seeing him return. It's been 2 years. How have you all been? Yuan greeted them with a calm smile, acting as if nothing had happened. We should be asking you that. Are you okay? What's the situation like now? Shi Meili said. I should be fine. I don't think that elder will come after me anymore. What makes you so confident? I know that elder very well. He's one of the most righteous individuals in this sect. Ji Ran then spoke, Young master, I must ask, why did you kill that disciple? You even ended up losing 2 years of progress because of him. I killed him because he was a despicable person. As for his crimes, they should be revealed soon. What are you going to do now? Lan Yingying then asked. I'll continue what I was doing before. How's everyone's progress in the last 2 years? Yuan then asked. She merely scratched her head in a somewhat embarrassed manner and said, honestly, not much. Although our progress as spirit apprentices was quite fast, it's much harder to progress as spirit warrior. In 2 years, we've only managed to increase our cultivation by 6 to 7 levels, so we're just catching up to you. I'm the only one who's managed to surpass you, young master. Ji Ran said, revealing his cultivation to be at the 5th level of Spirit Master. I'm only lacking a few more contribution points to take the inner court examination. Meanwhile, Lan Yingying had reached the 7th level of Spirit Warrior, with Shi Meili at the 5th level of Spirit Warrior. Sister Songyan is also at the peak of Spirit Warrior like you, Shi Meili added. I see, what about Yingzi? Yuan asked with a hint of nervousness in his voice. Oh, right. You don't have to worry about Yingzi. She made it to the Immortal Monastery, Lan Yingying said. However, she only arrived last month. Last month? Where is she right now? She's training at the hunting grounds. Also, you won't believe why it took her this long to come here, Shi Meili answered. Why? Yuan curiously raised his eyebrows. I think it'd be best if you heard it directly from her, Shi Meili chuckled. Is that so? I'll ask her later then. Sometime later, Yuan had to visit the disciplinary hall to retrieve the spatial rings that were confiscated from him right before he entered confinement. Yuan anticipated that some of his stuff would be stolen, but to his surprise, none of his items were touched. In the past, his belongings would always mysteriously disappear after coming out of confinement. Of course, they were all stolen by the sect elders, and there was nothing he, a mere disciple, could do about it. Even if they wanted to steal my things, I don't have much for them to steal, he thought to himself. Besides the spirit stones he got as an allowance, Yuan had sold all of his monster cores and materials for points before the tournament. After regaining his spatial rings, Yuan made his way to the hunting grounds, where he remained for 2 weeks straight. During Yuan's time in the hunting grounds, Elder Bai presented all the evidence he had gathered about Bai Zhan to the sect leader before making it known to the rest of the sect. Standing before his fellow sect elders, his expression was solemn as he spoke. Because of my own shortcomings, my grandson, Bai Zhan, has committed many unforgivable crimes within the sect. When the other sect elders learned of Bai Zhan's crimes, they were all left speechless. They were also angry that they had been supporting a monster this entire time without knowing. Before long, the news reached the rest of the sect. When the outer court disciples heard of it, they were left in utter disbelief. Bai Zhan, a figure most had respected and admired, was now revealed as a serial killer who also defiled corpses. What? Bai Zhan was responsible for those missing disciples. One of them was my friend. I heard he defiled their corpses, even dressing them up like dolls. How sick was Bai Zhan in the head to do such things? Fuck. I cannot believe I admired a bastard like him. It was revealed that Bai Zhan had exploited his status and reputation to deceive unsuspecting victims. His esteemed position within the sect allowed him to gain trust effortlessly, making it all too easy to lure others into his grasp. Under the guise of friendship or mentorship, Bai Zhan would invite the victims into his home, where he would mercilessly end their lives, and not wanting to damage the bodies, he would often resort to using poison or strangulation. Once dead, Bai Zhan would transport their corpses to his immortal cave, where he would defile them. Although the exact number of Bai Zhan's victims remained uncertain, the estimated count was around 100. The true scale of his crimes might never be fully uncovered, but the sheer number was enough to send chills throughout the sect. Fortunately, Bai Zhan had no accomplices, or they would have faced Elder Bai's wrath. As for Yuan, who had once been the most despised individual in the sect for killing Bai Zhan, the truth had completely shifted his reputation. What was once seen as a heinous act was now hailed as justice. The very people who had condemned him now praised him as a hero, recognizing that his actions had rid the sect of a monster hiding in plain sight. After arriving at the hunting grounds, instead of going straight to the core, Yuan began hunting the magical beasts in the outer region instead. He wanted to test out the heaven-refining physique, but since he wasn't sure he actually had it, he decided to test it with weaker monster cores. On his 7th kill, Yuan acquired a 5th-level Spirit Apprentice monster core. Even if my heaven-refining physique doesn't work, consuming this won't instantly kill me, Yuan mumbled as he held the monster core before his lips. A moment later, Yuan consumed the monster core. When the monster core entered his mouth and touched his tongue, it instantly melted. It worked, Yuan thought to himself as he swallowed the liquid and absorbed the spiritual energy within. However, he quickly noticed something was amiss. Although he'd managed to consume the monster core and absorb its spiritual energy, it wasn't perfect. I'd only managed to refine a portion of the spiritual energy, about 10%. Yuan mumbled. His original body and heaven-refining physique allowed him to refine all of the monster core's spiritual energy even before it was awakened. Yet, the heaven-refining physique he'd attained in this world only managed to refine 10% of the monster core's spiritual energy. Even though they'd managed to recreate the heaven-refining crystal and its powers, they are unable to completely replicate all of its power, Yuan wasn't too surprised by this outcome. In fact, he was pretty satisfied by it. After all, he thought it wasn't going to work at all. Even if it's only a tenth of its original strength, that is more than enough for me to completely surpass everyone. In cultivation, after confirming the heaven-refining physique was working, Yuan went straight to the deepest region and began slaughtering the Spirit Master magical beasts there. 2 weeks later, Yuan left the hunting ground with his cultivation at the 3rd level Spirit Master. On his way out, he noticed a familiar face. It was Yingzi, and she was hunting magical beasts by herself. Not wanting to disturb her, Yuan waited for her to finish her hunt and silently watched her from the shadows. She's gotten pretty good with a sword. Although Yingzi was not at the level of a swordmaster, she managed to reach a respectable level of sword mastery by herself. Once Yingzi finished her hunt, Yuan approached her. Yingzi. Yuan. Yingzi's expression remained calm when she saw Yuan, but her eyes were noticeably brighter than before. Did you forget? I'm Xiaoyang right now, Yuan corrected her. Oh, right. When did you finish your punishment? She asked. 2 weeks ago. I heard you only arrived at the Immortal Monastery recently, but you're already at the 1st level of Spirit Warrior. Did you stay at the Bamboo Garden until you reached Spirit Warrior? Yuan noticed her cultivation was too high for someone who'd just qualified to enter the Immortal Monastery, suggesting that Yingzi had become a cultivator long ago but didn't leave the Bamboo Garden on purpose for some reason. She nodded and confirmed, I left when I reached Spirit Warrior. Why did you choose to stay there for so long? Yuan asked with a puzzled face. What came out of Yingzi's mouth left Yuan dumbfounded. The food there was too good, and I was worried that I would no longer be able to taste it again once I left, so I decided to stay until I couldn't, she calmly said. Yuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry after hearing her ridiculous reason for staying in the Bamboo Garden for almost 4 whole years. However, it was definitely befitting of her character. I don't even know how to respond to that, but you must be relieved to know that the food in the sect is just as good if not even better than the food in the Bamboo Garden. Yingzi nodded, yes, I would have come here sooner if I knew the food here was just as good. What do you think of the trial so far? It must be difficult for someone like you, right? Especially the physical labor, Yuan asked, glancing at her with curiosity. Yingzi shook her head slightly before responding, her expression calm. At first, I was more puzzled than anything. It's not as bad as the others made it out to be. Once I became a cultivator, it became incredibly easy, almost effortless. Unlike the others, who struggled with the demands of physical labor due to their privileged backgrounds, Yingzi was a predator from the primal expanse. Chopping bamboo and fetching water didn't hurt her pride. It was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. I see. Are you heading back now? Yingzi then asked. Yuan nodded. Yes. You want to return with me? She nodded. It's almost time for breakfast. Unbeknownst to Yuan, Yingzi would eat 3 meals a day without fail, even while training inside the hunting grounds. Surprisingly, the sect's food delivery system extended beyond the residential area and even reached the hunting grounds. That said, they would only deliver the food to the entrance of the hunting grounds. Upon returning to the residential area, Yingzi wasted no time and immediately ordered food. As for Yuan, he planned on taking a shower, but he noticed someone standing by his doorstep, and it was someone he wasn't familiar with. How can I help you? Yuan spoke as he approached this individual who was wearing the robes of an inner court disciple. This male disciple narrowed his gaze at Yuan and asked, Are you Disciple Xiao Yang. That sounds like me. Who's asking? I am here on behalf of Grand Elder Bai. He wants you to visit him whenever you're available. Sure. I'll give him a visit as soon as I clean myself up. The inner court disciple nodded before leaving. That disciple has been waiting